Hey guys, the third video for the series that I'm making for the class is going to be over preparing an image for the World Wide Web. There's a few things that we need to go over. I think I talked about the images in class, but I basically just lectured. This is going to be more of a tutorial once we get into Photoshop. There are some important aspects to using images, and I want to reinforce specifically what those are. So I don't know how long this video is going to be, but it'll probably be close to about 40 to 50 minutes. Okay? All right. So like I said, this video is going to be about preparing an image for the web. There are three types of image formats that are acceptable for generic images. Now, you'll notice that I have four listed here, and I'm going to talk about the last one in a minute, and then I actually talk about it again on the next slide. But for now, what I want you to be aware of, and you need to remember these, you'll probably remember when you actually start using images in your web pages, but try to remember that these are important, and you need to keep them in the back of your mind. The first one, and it's the oldest one, is the graphic interchange format. And it was, I think it's somewhere around 1988, 1989 is when it came out. And it's because it's when it came out, monitors didn't have a lot of colors. So it was limited to 256 colors. And by today's standards, it's low quality. The second one is the one that we all are familiar with, and that's the JPEG, which stands for Joint Photographic Expert Group. The things that make the JPEG still popular, I think it's still the most popular, is that you can adjust the quality, which will adjust the file size. And it has full range of colors, which works out to be about 16.77 million colors. The third one is the newest of all of them, and this is the Portable Network Graphic, or the PNG. Just like the JPEG, it has full color, but it can also include transparency. And the GIF can include transparency as well, but with the low colors, it doesn't really matter. It's not a very good transparency. The PNG, on the other hand, it can be the perfect image if you need transparency. And then the last one, this needs to be included in the lecture, but it doesn't really qualify. And I'm going to explain that, I think, in the next slide. I have some, or not the next slide, 2 slides down, why I believe that. And that's the scalable vector graphic. It's an SVG. It's the most recent. It's a vector graphic, and because of that, it retains its quality at various sizes. So imagine that you made a logo at normal size in Illustrator. You could shrink that logo to this big, and the quality would be the same, the file size would be the same, everything would be the same, but it would be high quality. Now, before I actually get into talking about the rules and the expectations for modifying images for the web, I want to make sure that we're on the same page when certain words can be kind of confusing. So basically, the idea on this slide is that I want to clarify the meaning between the file size and the image size. There's times, like in class, I might say the file size when I'm actually talking about, or I'll say the size of the file. And I may be suggesting its dimensions. But for this actual presentation, I want you to keep in the back of your mind that when I say file size, it refers to the amount of space that image will take up on a computer hard drive. We think of it as like 100K or 100 kilobits. It could be, some images are very large. They get huge, but for web, usually from a photograph or something like that you take on your camera, you're thinking 21 megs, which is really a large photograph for the web. And then the other is image size. image size refers to the actual dimensions of the image. However you put it, it means there's a height and width component to image size. Now that could be 600 pixels by 300. It could be a 1200 pixel wide image. It just refers to the actual dimensions of the image. All right, now to the rules to follow when determining image sizes and image types. These are rules I want you to follow. There are exceptions to the rules, but for the most part, keep these handy because this is what I would expect you to know and to follow when you start building your websites. First of all, most images shouldn't be larger than 1200 pixels width. If you imagine that, say your web page that you're building is 1200 pixels, right? 1200 pixels wide. That's how big the browser needs to be for your web page to be fully seen. You don't need an image that's 1300 pixels wide. Does that make sense? No, I don't think anybody's going to be creating web pages that are 2200 pixels wide. And if you are, I'm going to get you to stop. 1200 should be the largest web page that you build. So that means that there should be no reason that you have an image larger than 1200. Okay, all image should have the smallest dimensions as possible. We're talking about the image size. Say you want an image that's going to be 600 pixels wide by 1200 pixels, or not 1200, let's go 600 by 600. Now, in that statement that I made before was most images shouldn't be larger than 1200 pixels wide. That refers to, say, a minimum size or the maximum size. Now, when we take that down, if you need a 600 pixel image, you don't use a 1200 pixel image for that. You need to resize the image to the size that you need. I hope that makes sense. The first one is a maximum width. And then the second one is what size should the image be? And it should be the size that you actually need. Keep the sizes small. They should be as small as possible, but the quality also needs to be as high as possible. And we'll talk about that when we're actually in Photoshop. In nearly all cases, your images should be 72 pixels per inch. And you can refer to it as dots per inch because essentially they're the same thing. This is something that's changing. For a while, it looked like it was going to change really quick. That the 72 ppi was actually going to jump up to 300 ppi on screens. But the reality is that for the most part, every monitor, every television, pretty much all screens, except possibly for your phone, it can only show 72 ppi. So your images should not be any higher than 72 pixels per inch. Now the exception, like I said, is the phone and some high definition televisions. But with the phones, the screens are so small that you take a 72 dpi image and crunch it into that size and you actually get high resolution. When picking an image type, there are some certain things to consider. Now this is what I was talking about on the other slide. A GIF is only used, now remember, a GIF is only used if you need transparency and have very few colors. Think logo, simple graphics. You wouldn't want to do it for a photograph unless you like the effect, but it's not meant for that. JPEG and PNG are best for photographs. There's no reason to use SVG until you are designing vector graphics. SVGs are basically, if you were to look at an SVG file, it's all code because it is all based on mathematics. So it's different. It doesn't work with pixels. So we don't use that for photographs. We use it for simple graphics. Now, a PNG is it was originally created to replace the JPEG and the GIF. It didn't really work out that way. Most people didn't kind of want to change. They were happy with the way it was. But the PNG can be used for all types of graphics. There's a PNG 8, which is equivalent to a GIF. There's a PNG, just a standard PNG, which has, it's a 24-bit image, just like a JPEG. And then the last one, and this is where PNGs, I would suggest using a PNG, is it has transparency. So you have 24-bit, which is pretty much the most amount of colors that you need for modern monitors. So you have all the colors, plus you have an added level of transparency that the JPEG doesn't have. Now that comes with a file size increase. In fact, it'll almost, well, I shouldn't say it will, but there are cases where if you have a lot of transparency, it'll actually double the file size. And you don't want that. So for the most part, you don't need PNGs. If you have transparency on a photograph that you want to put on the web, then you're going to want to go PNG for sure. Otherwise, it's not that important. So hopefully this gives you an idea of what you have to remember and what we're going to be working towards. The next part of this video, we're going to open up Photoshop, prepare an image for the World Wide Web. Okay, so if you don't have Photoshop open, go ahead and open it now. Pause the video if you're actually going to be opening it. Now, as far as I can remember, I think everybody has Photoshop experience in class. So this is going to be based pretty much on that you have background knowledge. Now, what we're going to be doing with modifying the image doesn't really need any background knowledge. What's important is that you can open Photoshop and that you can reset the workspace and make any modifications that you want. Okay, just to kind of get anybody who doesn't have a lot of Photoshop experience up to date, what we're going to do, make sure that the workspace is set to Essentials. So go up into the menu bar, choose Workspace Essentials, and then go to Workspace Reset Essentials. You kind of have to do that when you're starting out, especially when other people use the computer that you're on. There's always a possibility that they have changed the workspace. And if that's the case, there are situations where certain tools won't be where they are in different workspaces. I've run into it in Illustrator all the time. They'll say, I can't find a tool. And it turns out that because they were in a different workspace, that tool wasn't part of the toolbar. So I think the first thing that I need to do is basically give the people that have no experience at all some basic ideas about Photoshop. The first is Photoshop is specifically created to edit photographs. That's why the name is Photoshop. It can be used for other things. In fact, it's very good at, say, just illustration. Drawing on Photoshop is something that a lot of people do. They'll never edit a photograph, but they can illustrate, make illustrations in Photoshop. It has other purposes. I think you can still make animations. It can do all sorts of things, but it was primarily created for photographs. And that's where it excels. That's what got it popular. Okay? So we're working from the same perspective. You would not use a different program to resize an image. You would just use Photoshop. Now there are other programs that aren't made by Adobe that you could use. But for the Adobe programs, this one, Photoshop, is made specifically for what we're going to be doing. I want to make sure that everybody remembers that at the very top of your Photoshop screen is the menu bar. And the menu bar has everything available to you that you'll need. So if you run into problems later on, or even during this tutorial, remember that this is where we're going to be working from. Resizing images is pretty simple. It's not a difficult thing to do. We won't be using any tools or anything else. We'll just be using this menu bar. Okay, now I'm going to add an image. Now I grabbed an image that was online. I think I'm going to link to it, but honestly, as long as you have a big image, you can do exactly what I do in this tutorial. The image has to be large. It has to be more than, say, 1200 pixels. Let's go 1700 pixels wide. If you get something too small, you don't see what's actually happening to it, and it won't really illustrate what it is that I'm trying to show you. I'm going to open. I'm going to go to the desktop, and it is this West Michigan Lake sunset. And I'll open it, and you can see right here that this is the image. I have rulers shown. Some of you, your screen may look like this. And the only difference between this and the way it did look is I had rulers up at the top. You don't necessarily need rulers, but for this tutorial, I want you to show them. Hit Command R, and you can see rulers show up. Now there is a possibility that mine is in pixels right now. Yours may not be in pixels. Yours could be in inches or something like that. If that's the case, then you need to go up into the menu bar under Photoshop CC and go to Preferences and go to Units and Rulers. Make sure that the rulers are set to pixels. And we can see over here, this is what I was talking about with the slides. 72 pixels per inch for screen resolution. And that's what we're shooting for. Our screen resolution needs to be 72. You don't have to change anything. It should automatically be like that. The only thing you have to change is the rulers here. Go ahead and hit OK. And now your ruler should be based in pixels. You can see here, I'm going to make mine a little bit larger. It looks like it's about 19 something and about 800 something. Okay, make sure that you have an image that's large enough that there's a reason to resize it. The next thing we need to do is to go into image size. And you get this dialog box. Now this dialog box can actually be kind of complicated. It's not, when you get used to it, you're going to find that there's certain things that you do all the time that you don't really need to check all the boxes and check everything. The first thing we notice here is the image size. As it sits right now, it is 4.64 megabytes. Okay, that's a pretty good sized image. It's not huge, but it's pretty good size. It's way too big for the World Wide Web. So we're going to have to resize it. Now we could change it by percentages. A lot of times percent is a good way to go. Inches I wouldn't use for the web or any of these other ones for the web. Percentage sometimes is the way to go, and pixels always will be okay. So we're going to stick with pixels here. When I look at these right here, this gives us the dimensions. It's 1920 by 844. You'll notice that we have this kind of chain here, and the chain right now is locked. I can click on that and break that chain. Or I can click on it and reestablish the chain. And what this is basically doing is it's constraining. If I were, say I wanted this to be half, if the chain is unlocked, I make this 422, which is half of the 844. Notice that the 1920 hasn't changed. It's still 1920. I could actually do that by half and say 960, but I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do to constrain it, I'm going to click back on here, and now if I were to half the 844, so 422, notice that the width now is in half. All right, so this constrains. If you change one of the widths here, or you change the width or the height, it's going to keep the same aspect ratio that it had before into the new size. And for the most part, I'm sure there are exceptions. For the most part, this always needs to be clicked. All right, so let's make this image 600 pixels wide. I'm going to type in 600 here, and you can see that the height has gotten down to 264. When you get into other types of images, say you're printing something, there's a possibility that you're going to want to change the resolution. This kind of goes beyond the scope of what we're talking about in this tutorial. It actually gets kind of complicated when you start thinking about the image dimensions versus the resolution. It can be kind of confusing, so I'm not going to get into that. And I'm not going to get into resample. This has to do with when you change the resolution, or actually, if you change the width or the resolution, the other is modified. Okay? Now, you don't have to understand this. Just don't mess with it. If it's set to 72 dpi, then that's good. If it's not set to 72 dpi, then you need to change it to 72. If you change it to 72, everything should stay the same. If it doesn't, then tick on the resample and then change it back to 72 and then make the dimensions that you want. Okay? I know that sounds confusing, but to be honest, for the most part, the 72 dpi is going to be the default. I'm going to hit OK, and you can see that my image has gotten remarkably smaller. It is now 600. If I go up to the ruler, and it's going to be 266 or something, 244, whatever. Okay, now we've got the image the size that we want. I'm going to go up to, I'm going to save it. Now we could actually just do save, but this doesn't give us the control that we need. I could do save as, the same thing. It doesn't give us the control. What I'm going to choose is export. And I could do a quick export for PNG. I could change what I'm exporting it as. But for our purposes, this is kind of old. It means that it's been around for a long time, and probably in a few versions. I'm hoping it's still in your version, but there might be, eventually this will be removed. But for our purposes right now, go ahead and do save for web. Now you get that dialog box that opens up, and this will allow us the ability to view what our changes would do to the original image. So here's the original. You have some tools, nothing really important here except for the palm and the magnifying glass. Palm, if you're zoomed in, like for example, let's zoom in on the sailboat. If I want to move over to see something else, I take the palm and I can look at the other sailboat. If I want to zoom out, I hold the Alt key down and just click on it a few times till I zoom out. Now up here you'll notice that you have optimized 2 up and 4 up. I don't use this very often, but I think for right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the 2 up. Now here's the original. It's 464K, and here is what it would look like as a JPEG. You notice that it says JPEG here, maximum quality, 100 quality, and it's ticked optimized. Don't worry about optimized. This is such a small file that the optimization isn't really going to, not going to affect it that much anymore. Again, Adobe I'm pretty sure Adobe is going to get rid of this probably in about 5 years, 6 years. People still use it, especially for the web, so they can't get rid of it without people getting upset. It's useful if you're not sure what your changes are going to be for the image. Okay. Now, if I wanted to, say I wanted to change to a GIF. I'm going to change. We come down here. It's now 62.69K. we can't really see what the effect has done. So I'm going to choose the magnifying glass, and I'm going to just kind of grab an area. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. And you can see the original versus if we were to save this as a GIF. Maybe there's settings for a GIF that can make it better. See over here it says colors is set to 128. I'm going to put it to 256 colors. It does look better. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. And from a distance it doesn't look bad at all. Maybe around the sun a little bit. The file size is 78.52. It would take 1 second to add 2 megabits per second. So I'm going to zoom in again. Let's see how it looks. It actually doesn't look very good. You can see this dithering right here, this pixelation. So most likely we're going to have to go up to JPEG. I want the quality. I'm going to start with the quality at 100. You notice that this is what you set here is it kind of translates to the compression quality. So if I set this to say 60, the compression quality is high. Now you can do that, you can reverse that, you can set it to maximum and this will change to 100, however you want to do it. Generally what I do is I do the slide, I click on that little arrow and I just drop it down to a point where I think it looks the best. I think we need to stick with 100 because it's not losing a lot of quality. And if we look down here, 115K, when the original was 464, we would cut it in like a quarter. 25% of the original is now what the new one would be saved as. All right, now if we were to save it as a PNG, let's go to PNG. Remember I said there's 3 types of PNGs. There's the PNG 8, which is the same as a GIF. There's a PNG 24, which is the same as the JPEG. It doesn't give us the ability to choose a PNG 32, but here it gives us the option of transparency, and that adds that extra 8 bit depth to it. You can also notice now with transparency, we don't have anything that's transparent here, but if you notice, PNG 24 is now 170. It's jumped up about 70K. And you know, I would admit that's not a huge jump when we're talking about you know, it's basically less than a second difference. It would be so quick you wouldn't even notice it. But remember, it's not just one image we're concerned about. We're concerned about all the images. If you added 1 second to all the images that you use in your web page, you could actually really slow down your page, and that's bad. So for our purposes, and I don't see any quality difference. Here's the original and here's the PNG. So that's 70 or about 65K of data that we don't need. So I'm going to put this to JPEG, and down here you can see different colors. I never use this right here. Any of this type of editing you would do in Photoshop. I wouldn't do it in this window. But you could if, say, you decided, well, maybe I'll go 500 instead of 600. You could do that. Again, I don't really think that this is where you should be doing this. Okay, now to kind of break this down, what you need to pay attention to, or maybe to sum this up, what you need to pay attention to is the file type that you choose needs to be the highest quality that you can get to the original. Okay, so you make that determination either by choosing a GIF, a JPEG, a PNG, whatever has the highest quality with the smallest file size down here. Okay? This is your main objective, is the best quality, the lowest file size. Okay? I hope that makes sense. It's fairly simple in the bigger picture, but when you actually get to it, there's going to be, it's not going to be as clear cut as the way I'm making it sound. Once I get to this point where I have it exactly where I want, I'm going to hit save. Now, if you hit done, it's just going to go back to the original. I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to put it in my image folder, and I'm going to hit save. Now you can change the name if you want, but hit save, and we should be good to go. Okay? Now, like I said before, this isn't a difficult thing. It's going to be difficult maybe the first or second time that you try it. Eventually it'll make complete sense, and you know that you want a smaller file size because you want your page to load quicker, so you just open up Photoshop, you drop the image in, you go up into image size, you make it the file size that you want, and then you optimize it for whichever file type you think is best, and then save it, and then use it in Dreamweaver. Okay, well that's it. If you have any questions, put them in the comments section. Again, I'm not going to say this every video, but I'm going to say it for the first few videos I make. If you ask a question, there's a possibility that you're helping somebody else. If there's something that you don't understand, if I went too fast over, whatever, and you ask that question, somebody else might go, yeah, exactly. I didn't get that either. And when I answer it, hopefully it'll explain it for more than just you. Okay, thank you.